You may also have seen a note that says that the AI is on. I've enabled something with the AI to allow it to summarize our meeting as we go forward. Okay. I post those in our private chat. It's not perfect, but at least it does give you some indication of the kinds of things that we talked about as a refresher, if nothing else. Okay. All right. So hi, everybody. I'm Linda Brubaker, and this is Job Search Lunch and Learn with Linda. I'm a job search coach. I'm a former recruiter, a former headhunter, former hiring manager, former HR business partner, and I've been a job search coach now for the last 7 years. And I'm excited to tell you all that as of this morning, 852 of the people that I've worked with have gotten offers of some sort. Yeah, it was really exciting to wake up this morning and find 2 in my inbox. So I love those kinds of stories. What we're here for is to provide advice, support, information to help you get that offer too. Okay, so that's what we're all about. I'm going to start before we go through the win. So if you've got a win, start thinking about it. But one of the things that I realized that I haven't been doing on these sessions is going through and at least acknowledging everybody who's here. So it's another way of reminding us that if you're getting that connection request from somebody, you will at least have heard their name. So I want to welcome Michelle and Nick and Al and Lisa, Cynthia, Melinda, Allie, Allie or Lee? Allie, okay. Julie, Stacy, Chad, Lori, Ed, John, thank you. David, Scott, Norma, Steve, Kelly, Esmeralda, Joan, Karen, Kelly, Ray, Looney. Okay, we've got a good group here today. David, Scott, Norma, Steve, Kelly. I may have said some of you twice. I'm sorry. Joan, Karen, another Kelly, Ray, Cyrus, Louisa, Austin, Alan, Ina, Donna, Scott, Christine, John, Richard, Ken, Desiree, Eileen, and Willa. And if there are more, that's wonderful. I'm hoping that people are going to continue to join us. But as of now, we've got 39 people on screen, which is fantastic. It's a great start. And I expect that there will be more people joining us. If anybody has a quick win to share before we get going today, please raise your digital hand so we can call on you. Whether that win is an interview that you had. Okay, thank you, Al.
So as I've chronicled in the last, I don't know how many meetings we've had, I've been working on this position where they've created this position for me and it's taking a long time. And I've talked to literally everyone and now I'm having kind of the official interview tomorrow. And so I've been friendly with the VP who's doing the hiring. And I said, okay, so the interview's tomorrow. He goes, yeah, we'll just have lunch. We'll talk business. I said, okay. He goes, don't worry about dressing up for this. I said, you sure? I can wear a suit. He goes, I don't care if you wear socks. So, so having that meeting tomorrow. So hopefully I'll get hired pretty soon.
That's wonderful. Now, Al's actually making a bit of a career pivot, same industry, but different kind of a job. Yeah. So one of the things that I suggested to Al was that he do a little bit of informational networking with people who've done this role before to find out more about it. Because remember, guys, it's not just them hiring you. You get to hire them. You get to make the decision as to whether or not this is the right role, the right company, the right boss for you. So I want you to have as much information and take that much charge of it as possible. So I actually was able to get Al at least one informational interview with people who are doing the kind of role that he's looking at. Did that help to tell you?
Yes, Neil and Tim were fantastic. They gave me the actual good and bad about, the roles that I'm looking at. So it was great to talk to them. Thank
Wonderful.
you.
You're welcome. So I highly recommend, by the way, doing informational interviews. They're a great way of finding out more about the job, learning what's important in the role, seeing whether or not this is a fit for you, and what are the hot buttons that people might be looking for, ways you can prepare yourselves for those kinds of roles in the future. Okay, great. Okay, I see other hands up. Ed.
Yes. So there's this company that I've been interviewing with on and off since last fall. I had an interview with them last fall for one role, and I was told that they didn't think I was a good fit for that role. So then, about 2 months ago, I saw that they were advertising for another opening that they had in a slightly different role. So I applied for that. And about a month ago, I had an interview with them, but for whatever reason, they didn't hire me or move me on to the next step. But then this past Monday, a recruiter from that same company reached out to me because they have another opening that's a little bit different from what I had previously interviewed for. And he thought that I might be a great fit for that role. So he wanted to know when I could speak with them about it. And I have a interview with them tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock.
Congratulations.
So,
That's fantastic.
yeah. Yeah. What I thought was really neat about it was that the recruiter reached out to me about this role. So
That's exactly right.
yeah.
And that's one of the things that's important is never turn down an idea of an interview. You never know where it's going to lead. The idea is that when you're making those good impressions, and always, by the way, follow up, even if you get turned down after an interview, follow up. You're excited about the company, how much you learned, thank them for the opportunity. Okay. Ask to be able to keep in touch for future openings. All of those things are important. And you'll find that in many cases, and I've had a number of people who've been able to turn those turn downs in a company into future roles. Because it might not have been the right fit initially. It might have been that they liked you enough, but they had somebody else in mind. You don't know what all the circumstances are, but keep those doors open both on your side as well as everyone else's really makes a difference. And I've seen several people who've managed to turn those into future interviews. By the way, if you're not speaking yet, would you please turn your mics off? Okay, especially when we have this many people on screen, we're going to get a lot of echoes and we're going to hear background noise, and we'd rather not hear that. Okay, thank you. Good luck. Keep us posted. Okay, Desiree.
Hi there, how are you?
Good.
Afternoon, everyone. So I think the last time I spoke, I mentioned that I had to prepare for an interview, which I did. I've actually interviewed for consulting positions for 2 different organizations. So good, right?
Yeah.
One of them wants to make me an offer. I had a great rapport with both direct hiring managers. So a little bit of a story. So the one that has indicated that I actually have the job offer because I've gone through 3 interviews. The challenge might not be the hiring manager, which I had a great rapport with, but might be kind of the thought process of their manager.
Ah.
And the expectation that, you're going to come in as a PM and sort of crack the whip. And that's really kind of not how, as someone new in an organization, especially as a consultant, you want to kind of approach things. So in order for me to try to make a decision whether I move forward and accept this offer or wait to see if the next one actually goes forward, I've set up a short meeting and a short follow-up with that particular senior manager to ask some more questions, to kind of feel him out a little bit to see if this is a decision that I want to move forward with, because I've been in situations like that before where, the manager, the direct manager is fine, but the next person up is a bit of a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if anybody else has been there, and if you guys can maybe provide either a little insight or maybe some additional questions that I can ask him. It's not a long meeting. It's just really for me to determine whether I move forward or not.
Okay, so the
Oh.
idea being proactive enough to be able to ask those questions, I think is a very good thing, and to make those additional interviews. And congratulations, by the way, on where you are at the moment. Okay. Anybody have any real quick, because we've got a lot to do today.
Yes.
And anybody have any quick advice for Desiree? Ask your questions. I would also ask some people who are currently in the role or in the department, or those who have recently left.
Okay.
So do some
I actually
information.
don't know right now. I don't know anybody other than obviously the hiring manager. I don't know anyone there.
That's
This
okay.
This came through a recruiter.
Called LinkedIn and
Sure.
LinkedIn informational networking. That's what this is all about. Look at the company's page, find people who are there, and then put in the filter either current and the job title or the department. You're not going to be able to filter by department, but you can filter by job title or job area. You can also put in past. Okay, so previous company as opposed to current. You
Okay.
get more honest information.
Yes.
People who recently left. So, but those informational interviews can provide you with a lot of information, not just about what the job is about, but about the environment, the culture, and the way things work.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good luck. Keep us posted.
Thanks.
All right, John, you're next.
Hello, everyone. So did get feedback on, I think last week I mentioned that I had a interview for a business analyst position it was a contract position, but in the same industry, the PBM industry that I was in. So I thought that my rapport was very good with both people, including the hiring manager, and unfortunately did not get it. But I did get some feedback at least. They said that they were like I was just lacking some client management experience versus two other people they interviewed. So, and think I've come up with because I'm in QA right now, quality assurance, and I'm trying to like pivot into business analysis. So, I'm wondering if I should just try to go for more quality assurance roles at companies and then try to transition once I get into the company, or is there something I could do to like get more experience like with client management or training or anything for like business analysis?
So what I might do is that I might talk about how working with your internal clients is the same as working with external clients. Okay, you still have those client management skills, whether it's QA or whether it's business analysis. Your role is still to provide that advice, that information, that support to other people. You have to ask for information. You have to be able to provide information. So instead of talking about the example, it's a great lead in actually to what we're talking about today, is to tailor your stories, make them that specific but generic at the same time, specific in terms of action, generic in terms of where it actually occurred. So that you're trying to build that bridge between what you've done working with internal clients in one area to working with clients in another area. Never screen yourself out, guys. Okay. If this is the area you really want to go into, yes, it may be a little tougher, but don't screen yourself out.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
And if you want to talk privately, I mean, John, you and I have talked about interviewing before. We can do that again.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Thanks.
You're welcome. Hi, Ali. Sorry.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Very quickly. So I got a call from a recruiter yesterday via LinkedIn and had a pretty good conversation. And he said, hey, I get back to you by end of the week. Half an hour later, he called and said, I set up an interview with the co-founder. Is a startup with money, 50 million. It's always good to be a startup with money. So I have an interview with the co-founder of the company today. And that just came out of the blue. They are in the fintech, which is not my experience, but apparently they see that. Personally, I can do the job, so that's not a worry. But again, just happened yesterday, very fast. So I know more by end of today. Just want to share one thing.
That's wonderful. Good luck. Keep us posted.
Will do. One quick thing for Desiree, if I may. Glassdoor. Also, Glassdoor is not a bad source to get a little bit of insight into the company. I know sometimes they are really negative or really positive, but if you see a pattern, that can also help you to tell you about the company, their culture, their CEO, which a lot of times the way the CEO acts kind of trickle down the organization. So one suggestion is also take a look at companies' Glassdoor reviews.
Yes, thank you. I actually did think about that as well. So I appreciate that. So somebody else who has the same thought process. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So Glassdoor is kind of like the Yelp of job search.
Yep.
Okay. So you're going to hear the good, the bad, but you're going to hear it only on the basis of self-report. So yes, if you're seeing patterns, it's good. If you're seeing one or two things, maybe. But remember, the other good thing about Glassdoor is if you're going to be doing some of those informational interviews with people who have left the role or people who are currently in the role, now you've got some information that you can use to help frame some of your questions.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have a quick win? Did we get everybody? Okay. Then let's start talking about how you do your stories. So you know that the best way to answer any of these interview questions is with a story, whether they ask for one or not. Almost every question that you get asked in an interview is one that you should be able to provide a story, an example. Whether they're asking for a tell me about a time when, in your head, I want you to think about that time when that you can use to answer every question. There are so few questions that you should actually answer with just a yes or no, okay? Or just that very first answer. Are you legal to work in the US? Do you have X skill? And even that, I might tell a story. Okay. That's it. Okay. If they're asking to confirm something, then it's a yes or no. But even then, you're going to continue. Oh, there's one more yes or no. And that is, do you have a felony record? That's it. Most of those you're not even going to get asked in an interview. Everything else is your opportunity to share a story to demonstrate how you fit in the role. Now, there's lots of different ways of putting those stories together. We all know them. So what's your favorite way of putting together a story? Okay. I talk about, you've heard a lot about a S.T.A.R.T method, right? Situation, task, action, result. There's a S.O.A.R method. Situation, opportunity, action, result. There's, let me see, what other methods are there that are out there that people are using? Okay. Or situation, obstacle, action, result, excuse me. There's a PAR method, problem, action, result. Whatever you're putting together, whatever format you use, I want to make sure that if you're using, for example, the S.T.A.R method, that you're using the last T. You can have the best stories in the world, the best examples. But if I can't see how that example is applicable in my role, in my company, it's not a great example. So when I mentioned to John the idea about telling a story in that mix between specific and generic, if you've got a story that directly relates to the job in the same industry, go ahead and talk about it. Absolutely. You don't need a whole lot of editing along that process in terms of what that situation really is all about. But if, and I'm going to, John, I'm picking on you, not picking on you, I'm using you as an example, okay? John is trying to make that transition from one area to another. He's got the experience, but he has to be able to talk about it in a way that demonstrates how that experience is applicable in the new role. So when I mentioned earlier when we were talking that John has that client experience, he does. He's got it as an internal client in a different area. So instead of saying, for example, here's the generic part, right? Instead of talking about it in the QA role, you talk about it in dealing with your internal clients. If they ask where that came from, you can tell them. But by then, they've already heard the story. So that's that generic. The specific part is, what did you do? What was the outcome? What were you able to contribute? Talking about things in that specific but generic is important because too much of job search is history. Our resume, for the most part, is history. Your experience is history. But I want to see you moving forward. And one of the ways that you move forward on resumes is by talking about the transferable skills and experience right up at the top of that resume. Transferable accomplishments, the things that match. In your interview stories, it has to be exactly the same. The best stories that you have for this particular interview are those that are easily transferable to this role. One of the women that I worked with a couple of years ago was so excited. She's been doing media advertising, okay, and moving into a different industry. And she is now in SaaS sales. But when she was talking and trying to get into that SaaS role, she was talking about how easy it was for her to contact almost anyone in her Rolodex, okay, to be able to reach out and give them a quick call. She had all these names in her Rolodex. In fact, and I'm going to age both me and her, one of her stories was about dealing with Gene Siskel. Okay, now, if you know Gene Siskel, he was a movie critic. And the was is important. Unfortunately, he's no longer around to participate in these things. But more importantly, she was limiting what she was doing to a specific industry. People turned off and stopped listening when they didn't see that connection. So while she was saying, this is my best story, look at how connected I am, they were saying, but it doesn't fit us. And so some of the feedback she was getting was, you aren't relevant to our industry. When she was talking about a Rolodex to a 30-year-old, okay, it wasn't a question of, well, you got all these contacts. It was, what's a Rolodex? Okay. Today's Rolodex is a CRM. The same concept, different format. So make sure that your stories that you're telling are relevant to the job. If we're talking about putting something on your resume, because you use stories in so many different ways. So tell me a little bit about how you use your START stories. How do you put them together? You're going to be using your stories in not just your interview responses, because you want to be able to give an example every time, but you also use some of them in your actual resume itself. When you're putting together your accomplishments for the resume, you're using two pieces of the START story. You're picking them so they're transferable. But in your accomplishments, you're talking about the result, right? That's what you're highlighting. That result that matches what it is they're looking for, and then the action comes part of it. You don't have to say in that story in your resume the whole situation, because your bullets in your resume are very short. You're piquing my interest. You're giving me something that I want to talk and learn more about. In your interview stories, I'm recommending that you use either the PAR format or the STAR format or the SOAR format or my START format to put your stories together, but that in your conversation, you don't have to go through all of those steps. They will inform what stories you're putting together. They will help you to structure that story. and make sure that it's relevant to the new job. But think about it from the standpoint of somebody on the other side of the desk or the screen. If you're going through all of those steps, here was the situation, here was the action that I took, right? By the time you get to the result and the outcome and what happened in terms of the company, I've already lost interest. So if you think that it's important to give that entire background, turn the response backwards. Start with the outcome. Start with the result, and then talk about what you did to get there. The same way on your resume, we talk about demonstrating results, not just actions. Too often what I find when I'm listening to people give their interview stories is that it really is a recitation of tasks. The tasks that you do may not easily transfer from one company to the next. The situation, your thought process, the way you attack it, the way you work with other people on your team or other teams to achieve a desired result, that's what's transferable. One of the problems with many of our stories is that we go too far into the weeds. So it's really important to think about it from the perspective of somebody's listening. Okay? I'm looking at the chat very quickly. So yeah, Al, you said use a RATS format?
Yeah, there's another call that I'm usually on, and she says, why don't we start with the result? Just like you said, start with the results. So instead of the star, it's backwards, it's rats. So give them the result that you created, and that kind of leads them in like, oh, wow, you did what? You increased sales by whatever percent, and then you've got them, and then you tell them what you did, right? And so that's a different way of approaching it, but I think you're absolutely right. I've read a lot of things about people who have these stories practice out, and then they try to put something in the question, and it's not relatable to what they want. So I think you're absolutely right.
Okay. And when you're putting together your resume and the accomplishments on your resume or the bullets on your resume, absolutely use that RATS format. Because on your resume, I really only want the result. If you want to be able to do another couple of words about what the action was, that's great. But in your accomplishments on the resume, I don't need the situation. I don't need every step along the way. This is my teaser to see that what you've done would match for me. When you're putting through that interview story, okay, no matter what you're doing, remember that it has to be from my perspective, not just yours. It's always about the person on the other end of that desk or the screen, the person who's listening to you. We talk a lot in job search about what's in it for them. As the job seeker, as the person going through the interview, putting together that resume, you have to make it really clear that what you've done before is something that's easily transferable, easily fits in their role. You have to make that tie-in because they usually won't. They don't have the time or the energy. And sometimes you haven't made it clear enough to do it. So put together your stories, but I highly recommend that you don't over practice. We all talk a lot about practicing your stories. Okay. But if you over practice, you're going to have a tendency to try and memorize, and then it's not conversational, or you want to say what you wanted to practice, which may or may not actually fit the question as it was asked. Yes, Lisa.
So when you said to start with the result, it's the kind of the result and the transferable part start, like those two kind of go together.
So absolutely. So the idea is, Lisa, that you want to make sure that whatever story you're picking matches. You can draw that relationship between that story, that action, that result that you had, and the role that you're moving into.
And then go backwards from there to the
right. And
action.
Remember that you
Okay.
don't have to go all the way backwards. It informs what you're putting together. You can answer the question. But if you get too far into the weeds, the more into the weeds you get, the less likely I am on this side of the desk or the screen to be able to see that it transfers. It becomes history, not future.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Uh-huh. By the way, thank you for the question. Are there other questions about using STAR stories or putting them together?
Linda,
Yes, please raise your
I don't
hand.
have a I don't have a question. I don't have a question about it. I just want to piggyback off of what you're saying. That it's best if you sit down and write your stories down first before you go to an interview. Write it down so your stories don't become long and incumbent to that interviewer. Write it down so that you can shorten your stories down so that you can make sure that you're within that STAR or RATS.
Okay, so I actually am going to come up with a different perspective. I don't necessarily want you to write it down, especially not word for word.
But Linda, let me just say this to you. In the beginning, because you came from your job, you're not going to remember everything that you've done at your job because now they laid you off. You're kind of like, what am I going to do next? If you write it down first to make sure that you know what job you actually did and what story that you actually have, that's better off for you so that you can practice that before you go to an interview. You can practice that before you have an interview. You can have that story already down on paper and it won't be real long. You can shorten it down. You can say, okay, well, this is not what they want to hear. This is what they want to hear. So if you do that, that'll help you out as the actual interviewer. That'll help interviewee, excuse me, that'll help you out.
Absolutely. So the idea is, yes, I like the idea of pre-planning, but I like the idea instead of writing it all out word for word, okay, is the idea of writing yourself some bullet points, some talking points. The whole idea about a conversation or of an interview is this is a conversation. The word for word, the objective pieces, here's what I did, here's the outcome. That's your resume. That's the objective piece. That's what's going to get your foot in the door. What I'm looking for in an interview, in addition to that, are your soft skills. And if you're trying to remember everything that you said, trying to put in all of those bullet points for every story, it doesn't become conversational and you lose the ability to really impress me in many ways with your ability to communicate with me, not at me. So think about that distinction. If you are trying to remember everything that you've said, you're not trying to make as much contact. You're more concerned about remembering the wording in exactly the same way. It gives you less of an ability to adapt on the fly to what has come beforehand in the conversation. And to see as you're looking at somebody's eyes, you're looking at how they're reacting, to be able to adapt on the fly and move forward from place to place. Now, I know it's harder, especially in in-person interviews, to think about all those talking points. It's easier, some people say, to try and memorize. But I will tell you from this side of the desk, I can always tell a memorized answer. I don't want to have that memorized answer. I want the conversation. Yes, Willa.
I'm curious about perception. I don't think I've ever brought extensive notes. Like this conversation is interesting to me in that I think it's a great idea to have something to be able to refer to, but I'm curious about the perception. And I'm sure without question, it depends on the interviewer and it depends on, what their thoughts and opinions are. But I'm curious as to your opinions and maybe the opinions of other people, especially for someone, I think about neurodiversity and I think about how that's becoming more acceptable to have a different accommodations. I think about people who are anxious. What is the perception? Is it received poorly? Like somebody can't remember what an answer is? Or is that, do you think, becoming more acceptable? Would that potentially talk to an employer is the question.
I understand that. And I'm going to give you a yes and no answer, or a yes and. So if you're doing a virtual interview, okay, you can have the notes that you want. In fact, one of the things that I like about Zoom interviews is that you can narrow down your Zoom screen so that it's right there underneath your camera. And on either side of that screen, you can put up either a Word document or a sticky note, whatever you like, with a couple of words, phrases, or numbers so that you can easily refer to them. In an in-person interview, no, do not ever bring in extensive notes. Yes, that is thought of badly, especially because you're going to have to rifle through them to find what you want. You can, however, bring in something with a couple of words or phrases, very short, large, easy to read, easy to find, more likely to be numbers or something specific that you want to talk about. And if you're doing that in that in-person interview, say, I hope you don't mind, but I've brought in just a couple of notes just to make sure that I have the numbers that I can refer back to. Okay. Is that okay? But if you have to sit there and read through it, try and find what you were looking for, you've lost me. So whatever you're doing, if you're doing it on screen, if you're doing it in person, whatever notes you're bringing, large print, easy to read, lots of white space so you can easily find it. I want to be talking with you, and to be honest with you, and again, something most people won't tell you, I don't honestly care whether your numbers are exact. I don't want you to over-exaggerate. I'm listening for the thought process. I'm looking for the way you did things. Unless you're in sales, in which case I want to know your actual numbers, okay, and they will count. But otherwise, I really want to see what's going on and what you did, how you did it. Those soft skills are important. The numbers, that's part of the proof, that outcome that says those soft skills were working. Does that help?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. I mean, of course, you're obviously not going to want to rifle through papers, and an interview is a professional opportunity to showcase yourself. So I guess there's some degree of professionalism, and I agree, for the people in the chat, sticky notes are a great method. Thank you.
Oh, they're absolutely wonderful. Okay. And the idea is that it should be just a word or a phrase or a number. Even if you're bringing the notes in with you in person, a word, a phrase, or a number. And I mean short phrase, not 2 lines long. It is a tickler, a reminder. When you're putting together your stories, by the way, and I see your hand up, Desiree, we'll get to you in a second. When you're putting together your stories, what some people do is, some of the interview questions that may be asked. So put together a little spreadsheet, a little Word doc for yourself about 2 or 3 different stories you might be able to pull for each question. Think about all of them and how you might talk about them. The reason for doing that is that you don't know the way the conversation is going to go. And it may be that you've used one story for question 1 that you thought you might use for question 3. So you need a backup for question 3. You also want to be able to adapt on the fly based on the way the interview is going and the questions they're asking, and the information you're being able to pull as that conversation moves forward. From an interviewer's standpoint, one of the worst things is for somebody to give me that pre-planned response that doesn't actually fit my question. Make sure that you're taking the time to listen to what's actually being asked, to what's being said, and then adapting your responses to that. Okay. For most things, unless we're talking something very technical, there are no right or wrong answers. I'm learning about you and the way you work and the outcomes you can bring to something based on the way you're interacting with other people and the way you work. Okay. Desiree, do you still have a question, or was the hand up?
No, it was a comment, actually.
Okay.
And it feeds into what you were just saying, in terms of putting the spreadsheet together, and what I think one of the commenters previously who said write down the notes. That's something I do, and it's not about bringing notes into the interview. It's about refreshing my memory of some of the stories and some of the difference. It's part of the preparation process. Just the act for me of writing things down helps to jog my memory so that those stories are kind of fresh in my mind. So when I go in, because I have a few stories kind of fresh in my mind, I can do the adaptation, just as you said. As they ask questions, I can I can pull the right story from my memory and adapt it to whatever question that they're asking.
Perfect. Lori.
Okay, so just last night I was on another career session, with somebody else, and now I'm all twisted up because they were saying the exact opposite. I said Lori Oken is very spontaneous, and although I have these career stories in my head, I have this stuff in my head, I'm a conversational, I communicate, and I just can't all the time. I try to like ebb and flow the interview into a conversation depending on the style of the interview or my style, their style. Like I try to get to know the person to make us click. And unlike you, Linda, they said, no, you have to have your career story straight, down, matter of fact, and none of this creativity. You can be creative, but you can't be spontaneous and creative. You have to have the career story and your golden thread like all the way mapped through. And I'm a spontaneous person. Like I can have all these stories in my head and then pull out nuggets of, maybe there was something, I'm interviewing for a part-time job now. And I said, oh, but no, I don't have a floral degree, but I've done this and this and this with flowers. And I'm a docent, for our garden walk every year. So I pull things out of my head that just come out naturally. And that wasn't the way that they were teaching this methodology. And I'm all confused because you're like, no, it's okay to do that. So which is the right way, or is there no right way?
So as with everything else, you're going to have two people, you're going to have five different opinions. Okay. And that's obviously true. One of the things, there's a lot of information out there about job search. There's a lot of information about a variety of different things. I don't want to put anybody else down, but always double check to see the credentials of the person who's providing the advice. There are a lot of people who are very strong influencers who have never actually done the job. Okay, and I have no idea who you're talking about, Lori. I don't want to know. Okay, you want to tell me privately, you can do that, and I'll be happy to give you some information. But as both a career coach, a hiring manager, a talent acquisition manager, that means that I managed other recruiters, that HR business partner, that headhunter, okay? I bring all of that to being career coach, and I will tell you that from all of those individual roles that I've had, all of the hiring managers that I've worked with throughout the years, and I'm not going to tell you how many years other than more than 20. Anyway, people are interested in hearing how you fit in the role. And part of that is, how would you actually behave on the job? On the job, unless you are writing a written report, you have to be able to adapt on the fly. I want to see how you will interact with other people. I want to see that you can think on your feet. I want to hear your thought process. I want to see you be able to relate to me and or to other people. You can't do that if you are so concerned about giving that standardized response, because that standardized response may not fit. It's like going into any other kind of a communication situation, Lori, right? Where we sometimes find ourselves so busy thinking about what we want to say that we stop listening to what the other person is doing and what they're saying. And so by the time we start talking, it's no longer relevant to the conversation. The honest truth, okay, from all my years of experience, from everyone I've ever spoken with who's actually done this work, either as a recruiter, hiring manager, Okay. HR person is that I want to hear your thought process. I want to be able to see you in action. So should you be able to adapt on the fly? My feeling, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have to decide from all the people that you're listening to, and there are a lot of us out there, who makes the most sense for you and what seems to work. Okay.
Okay, thanks. Because I'm always myself and I just can't go out of my own character trait.
And I
So-
honestly don't want you to, because if you're doing that, you're going to be a different person in the interview than you would be on the job.
Yeah.
And that's not good for either of us. Okay.
Okie doke. Thank
All right.
you.
All right. You're welcome. So I see a lot of things going in the chat, and we will go with them. But I wanted to be able to give you the opportunity, guys, to do some networking today. Okay. So if you wanted to do that, I'm going to let you all tell me. Okay. Because I can only go until 12:25 today. Okay. So another half an hour. If you'd like to do some small group networking, we can absolutely do this. If you want to continue this kind of a conversation, we can do that too. Okay. So would you all like to do some of the networking today, or do you want to continue? If you want to do some networking today, please raise your digital hand. I'm just going to count hands raised. Okay, so far I say 6 out of 40. Okay. All right. If you guys, okay, would rather continue the conversation, all right, now you guys can put your hands down. If you'd rather continue the conversation about these stories, we can do that instead. I'm seeing it's not even actually, it looks like the networking is just slightly higher. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Nope. Continue the
I wasn't sure if you wanted us to raise our hands again.
Okay, so maybe
Because everybody else would have been not weighing in and wanted to continue the conversation.
okay, so I guess I'm confused. I should have put together an actual LinkedIn poll and I didn't, or a Zoom poll. Okay. So the hands that are currently raised, are those for continuing the conversation? Yes? Okay, let's do that. We'll do networking then another time. Does that make sense? Since I know I have to leave, and I'm happy to go, we'll go for another 5 or 10 minutes here on the conversation, and then anybody who wants to stay for another 20 minutes at the end, we'll do some networking when we're done. That way we'll do both. So what other questions can I answer for you about the interview stories themselves? Cynthia, is your hand raised because you have a question or because you were trying to vote?
Sorry, I took it down.
Not
Thanks.
a problem. Okay. So what other questions can I answer for you about the whole idea of interview stories and trying to come up with the right ones? Scott, I noticed that you said that numbers count. They absolutely count. It depends on what it's for. Okay. But sometimes numbers are important and sometimes the exact number is important. Sometimes you can come up with an approximate. Lisa.
I was going to say, can you talk through an example? Like say, here, if you had this question, here's how you would do the transferable results, like say one for us.
Okay, so how about somebody else? Do you have an example that you want to give real quick and I can help you change it? Okay. Melinda.
How do you handle a difficult stakeholder?
Okay, so how would you answer that?
So I
Well,
gave a
before you
story.
do, stop, before you do, Okay, since we're trying to talk transferability, what industry are you coming from? What kind of a job and industry would you be going through hypothetically?
So I am a business process analyst. I would go back into my business analyst role if possible.
Okay.
So within that business process analyst role, you do have a tendency to have conversations with stakeholders, especially if you're in a change management group. Sometimes the stakeholders can get a little beside themselves. Sometimes they can get a little mean in want things done immediately. So how you handle them is first you need to listen to what their problems are, so that you can get a resolution to that actual stakeholder. So you need to listen, find out what the problems that they're having, how can you resolve their problems, and how fast can you make a turnaround for that actual stakeholder.
Okay. So let me give you some feedback. When I'm looking for a story, when I'm asking for your example, I don't want you to just tell me tick off here's the steps that I would do, unless you've never done it before. I want you to give me an example of how you did it.
So let me stop you, Linda, and let me go back and tell you what the story would be. So my story would be, I'm in a change management group. There was a piece of the change management group that I had to do. I messed that part up because I didn't know exactly what to do. So when I went back to the meeting the next day to change, the stakeholder asked, was that part of the project done? And I said no, because I didn't have the experience and I didn't know what I was doing. So it wasn't done. The stakeholder got kind of upset. So I listened to what the stakeholder said. I had to listen to see what that stakeholder said about the actual piece. What I did was I didn't get upset. I came back to that stakeholder and said, well, I understand I need to do this part, that part, this part, so that we can move this project forward. I took that piece and told the stakeholder, I will work on this and make sure that this piece of the project is completed for tomorrow. So when the next day I had the meeting the next day, that piece of the project was completed and that stakeholder was satisfied and I was satisfied as well.
Okay. Are you open to some feedback?
Yes.
Okay. Will, would you like, or Lisa, would you like to give some too?
Sure. The one thing I was thinking was to start with the result, like you were saying. Like, I think you kind of went through the forward start in order.
Right. And I think what happened with the way that you presented that, it was good information, but by the time you got to the end result, I had lost interest. Okay. I don't want to hear every single step along the way necessarily. I want to hear what happened. You had a stakeholder who was unhappy because you hadn't been able to complete one portion of a project. So what you did was to make sure that you had a conversation. Okay. And double check to make sure exactly what was necessary so that you could go back in and solve the problem. Now, to be honest with you, that wasn't a great example. I probably would not have used it. Because I'm not sure, how do you deal with a difficult stakeholder? That didn't answer the question. A difficult stakeholder is one who doesn't agree with what you're doing or who's giving you some grief along the way. So it's not that you did something wrong, you didn't follow through, you didn't have the information you needed to get it done to begin with. Okay. If you didn't understand the full length of the project because he didn't or she didn't explain it, then that's the issue, is that there was a miscommunication. Okay. We weren't right on the same page to begin with. I wanted to find out more about it. So use it as an example. If that was your example, Melinda, more about, I met with a stakeholder and this had a situation where a stakeholder wasn't as thought he or she was fully explaining what was going on, but hadn't completely done it. And I knew that I needed to take a step back. One of the things that was important was that obviously we weren't on the we're talking about the same thing on the same language. And that's one of the skill sets that I bring as a business analyst, is being able to translate things from stakeholders' perspective into what the work is that needs to be done. So I knew that in this case, I needed to take that step back in order to have that happen. So we had a long conversation, asked lots of good questions, had that back and forth to make sure that it was done. And then along the way, I would continue with this stakeholder to go back to them and make sure that I was asking questions, providing input, so that instead of saying that and this is a bad situation on my part, but I wanted to make sure that we were doing it in increments so that the stakeholder felt fully involved, felt that their concerns were being met, and that I understood where they were coming from and what they were looking for. So that continuous feedback loop. Okay. Another way of doing thank you, Melinda. Okay.
You're welcome.
But
Thank you for the feedback.
Absolutely. So the idea is, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that our stories are not only relevant to the new job, but also ones that we might be able to show ourselves in the best light. Okay. We all make mistakes, and that's okay. But how did you compensate for it? And so you could start by, remember, this is a conversation. It is a story. In Melinda's case, I might have said, okay, so my first conversation with a stakeholder, I honestly goofed. I thought I knew what they were talking about, and it turns out that there was another piece of the puzzle that I had missed. So in order to correct it, I did X, Y, and Z, and as a result, the project was here. But if you go through all of the steps of asking all the questions along the way, I've lost you again. I want to know what you did to the process. Okay. Lisa, can you give me an example of a question that you were concerned about?
I know this one I didn't answer well in an interview was, tell me an example of a project where you failed and what did you learn from it?
I love that question. Honestly, I do. Okay. So can you give me the way you answered
So
it?
what I described something about a project where it was taking much longer than we expected. But I realized after the interview that then I said, I build such good teams that our whole team we were all in it together. We worked over the weekend to get the testing done. And then I realized after the interview, that wasn't what I learned from it. That was how I dealt with it.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Okay. So you've just demonstrated a very important point, Lisa, is really listening to the question. What is it that they're asking? Because a lot of questions will sound the same. They asked not just how did you fail, but what did you learn?
Yeah.
And that what did you learn in that particular case, that's the one that I want to hear. That's the transferable piece. Okay. Because we all fail at things. But it's that process that you would follow to make sure that you not only solve the problem, but that it doesn't take place again. How did you learn to deal with that so that you can maybe prevent it in the future? That's that transferable piece.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Anybody else have one that they want to try real quick? Just trying to look in the chat real quick. The chat is great. I love it. If there are questions there, I will try that we didn't get to, I will try and do them in the private group. I will put this in the private group. The chat will be pasted into the private group so that you can all access it as well. I'm going to turn